What's your name?
My name is Dick Moore.
I did.
If you were speaking to the legislature for the first time in your position as governor, what would you tell them they needed to do about the tax structure? What would you tell them they've been missing the boat on and they need to get to work and act?
It's going to be a long speech. Paul and I have a different view on what was it, 1495? I don't know whether it's going to be perfect. And I don't think Paul really knows that it's going to be imperfect. I don't think any of us know. There are people on both sides of this making predictions on both sides of the case. Fundamentally, I think it did two things that are important to me. One is that it switches the burden, or I think it switches the burden, and if it doesn't, I wouldn't be for it. Switches the burden to consumption from savings. I think that's important. I think it's important in Maine, I think it's important nationally. And secondly, it shifts more of the burden to people who visit our state. We're the cheapest state in America for tourists. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, the elasticity, there's no evidence that people won't come here because there's a meals and lodging tax that's 100 basis points higher. So, you know, I just want to make it clear that's my position. I think we've got more fundamental problems with the tax structure in Maine. And let me talk about them in terms of education. The legislature made a promise some years ago, 2001, Tom, maybe?
Before I got there, 55%.
No, I'm not. The legislature made a promise that the state of Maine would fund 55%.
03.
03, thanks, Paul. They made a promise that the state of Maine would fund 55% of local school expenses, and they've never done that. And this year it's going to be down around 44%, 45%. That's excluding construction. The state does that through a formula that may or may not be what any one of us thinks. But what they don't do is they don't really tie performance to it exactly. And so our schools have gone downhill all over the state. And when the state can't come up with the money, two classes of communities in Maine really suffer. One is service centers, and one is communities, non-service center communities, that don't have a tax base that they can tax in order to raise the money that's now not coming from the state. The consequence of this all over the state is a growing gap between, let's call them rich schools and poor schools, rich communities and poor communities. And it's not as though we shouldn't care about that because we happen to live in a have community versus a have not community. Remember, these are all kids who are citizens of the state of Maine. And sooner or later, if they don't have a good job, if they don't graduate from high school, if they haven't been well educated, the burden's going to be on us, all of us. And I think that, I don't know what the answer is, I'll say this right now. Maybe by the time I make my first speech on tax policy in the legislature, I will. But I do think that we have to take a very close look, rigorous look, at how we fund public education in the state of Maine. I mean, you know, the property tax presses a lot of wrong buttons. It drives farmers off their land, it drives fishermen away from the shore, it perpetuates inequities as I just described, and it sets communities against each other in competition for the tax base that probably hasn't always turned out to be the best thing for this state in terms of the course of development. The other thing I think I would say, in addition to the two things I've just said, is that we have absolutely got to begin to look every year at tax expenditures in Maine. Tax breaks, tax credits, tax deductions. Our operating budget in Maine today, our operating budget, the general fund, is about 2.8, 2.9 billion with these adjustments. Okay? That's half of the biennial budget. Every year in Maine, we spend $3.4 billion, $500 or $600 million more in tax expenditures, tax breaks, tax credits, tax deductions. And you know something? They're never evaluated. They're enacted, left on the books. Nobody ever looks to see what they've done. Nobody ever looks to see whether they produce jobs. Nobody ever looks to see what impacts they've had. They're just left there. $3.4 billion a year. That's something we need to do. That's something we need to look at. And Emily Kane, who's the House Chair of the Appropriations Committee, to her credit, has introduced a bill. I don't think it's been acted on. Has introduced a bill to impose a requirement that we evaluate tax expenditures every year. We need to do that.